Welcome, advocates, to another episode of the Lead in Equity Podcast, a podcast that focuses on supporting educators with the tools and resources necessary to ensure equity at their schools. Today's special guest is Miss Grace Delgado. So without further ado, Grace, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Pleasure is mine. I'm excited to get into today's topic, but before we get into it, I'd love for you to share a little bit about yourself and what you currently do.
Great. Thank you so much. So I'm Grace Delgado. My official name is Gracia Delgado. Born and raised in Puerto Rico. I am currently in Houston, Texas. I am the Director of Texas Initiatives for the English Learner Success Forum, which is a national organization that supports multilingual students. I have been in education for over 30 years, mostly working with multilingual groups of students, specifically in the Houston area in several school districts. And now I transitioned to ELSF for the last 6 months.
Perfect. Now, you say you're in Houston. That's where I grew up. What part of Houston are you in?
I am in the intersection of Houston, Pasadena, and Pearland. So South Belt area.
Okay, cool. I grew up on the southwest side, A-Leaf, Texas. That's where I'm from. So, cool. You and I were just talking before we got started about at my school that I work with. It's ELL, English Language Learners, but I prefer the multilingual learner as the terminology. And I kind of wanted to get start there on your take because I heard you mention multilingual a couple of times. So at some point, did you transition into multilingual from EL or ELL? Just curious.
So this has a little bit of history. We know that the term English learners is the term used by the federal government. So that term has been going in and out, ELL, ELs. Actually, Texas has been using EB for a few years, the emergent bilingual student. They did the transition to a more asset-based language. However, when we talk with different groups across the nation, we always like to center in the language in multilingualism, just because the kids are adding languages and it just opens up the term to a more inclusive term.
Love it. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, whenever we're starting with English, we're centering English and not accounting for, like, in the United States, for example. I mean, there's so many different languages that are utilized. And, unfortunately, English, if you don't know English, then you are looked at a certain way, even though you might know 6 other languages. Exactly. But if English is not your first one, then that seems to be a problem.
Exactly. There are some states that use the term ENL, English as a new language.
Okay.
Which is a kind of neat way to see it.
Okay. I feel like I got the right person on the show because you're spitting game. Okay. Well, cool. All right. Let's get into it because multilingual learners, right? And so I know, I live in Phoenix. And so we do have a high population of Spanish speakers. And I know a lot of the schools in the area, it's likely that they're going to have multilingual learners within their classrooms. However, I want to make sure that my listeners, not just those who might be in Phoenix, but not just those who have Spanish speaking students, but just in general, when we have students that are multilingual, what are some things that teachers should know that are assets for them when they're coming into the classroom?
For years, we have looked at our multilingual students as they don't know something. Like we tend to look at them like if they're empty vases and we must fill it with all of this information, new language, new ideas. And something we need to validate is that these are, regardless of the age, right? These are people that are coming to our classrooms that have previous experiences. So one of the pieces that we need to tap into is that connection to what they're bringing with their history, their family, their language, their cultures. The other piece is, how do we connect what we call background knowledge in education to their prior knowledge? I remember many years ago going into a class and having a conversation, and it had something to do with farming. And we had several kids that had firsthand experiences with farming because of their countries. And it was one of these moments that we were like, okay, we were able to tap into that previous knowledge and actually bring light to, like, okay, you get to share with us some of that knowledge that you have that goes beyond whatever we're reading on that book. So to me, it was always important, and it's something that I have coached teachers to do, is establish that connection, not just with the student, but with the family of the student, so we get a better idea of their full background to get better communication, better understanding of what they're bringing, so we can bridge what they need to learn in school based on that.
I love this, and thank you for sharing the connection piece. I want to be a little bit more specific with the connection side of things, and here's why. I've had conversations with individuals that talk about how simple things like leches, like that might be something that's familiar to a family, a Spanish speaking family at home, especially if they're of Mexican descent. And they are able to bring that into the classroom as opposed to saying apple pie or something like that, which we might consider as a dessert. So when we're talking about the connection piece, help us understand how specific should we get, or how intentional maybe we should be when it comes to connecting the school items to the home life.
Those are great opportunities to connect with things that they may know. So, for example, when we're connecting with things in the classroom or things at the school, I would see that as an opportunity to grow vocabulary. So, we're in the school, we're learning things. Maybe this is something that you didn't know what the name was. We had a full conversation in a training that I did about the word muffin. Like, do the kids know what a muffin is?
Right.
They have it for breakfast. So, we have the opportunity to bridge it to their language, but also, is this a dessert that they know? But we can also open the door and see, like, okay, do you have any kind of bread like breakfast that you eat at home? What are those things? What are they called? And just open it up for them. You mentioned tres leches, and you did mention from Mexican descent. I'm from Puerto Rico. I may tell you, I don't know, flan or a different type of dessert that my mom used to make, because tres leches might not be something I connect with either. But if we're opening the conversation in the classroom and maybe we read about something, I'm like, what type of desserts are in your house? And then they're sharing those, then we're actually growing the knowledge across the classroom, because other kids are also learning not just about their culture, but about other cultures. Because that's something that sometimes we forget, and we tend to also think is a monolith. We also think our Hispanic students are like one thing. They all share the same culture. So we also have to remember we all come from different places. We all have different cultures, but we do have some common places to connect. So it opens it up for highlighting those differences, but finding those connections that we have.
I think the key thing that I'm hearing in this is we need to ask and not assume.
Assume, yes.
I think you gave a really good example with the I'm trying to roll the R's. Don't don't get at me. But flan, you might understand, but you may not be able to relate or connect to. But sometimes what happens, especially those who English is our own primary language, we are doing our best intentions, and we're thinking, oh, students can connect to this because it's of Spanish heritage, and not consider, well, is it geographically acceptable? From an ethnicity side of things, is that something that we need to consider? Here's a lesson that I learned, Grace. I worked on a reservation, and I kind of like what you mentioned earlier. And again, just pure ignorance, not understanding. Indigenous culture doesn't mean indigenous culture. There's various tribes, and each tribe has things that they're into, languages and customs. So I had lumped all the indigenous students prior to coming to this reservation. I had lumped everything together thinking it was all the same. Then I quickly understood, wait, an igloo does not mean the same thing to this tribe. They are historically, teepees is what their lodging, versus maybe a wigwam, or like these different things that I had to learn because again, best intentions, I just wasn't familiar. So one of the key parts here is we need to ask questions. So my question to you then, Grace, is what are some ways that we can ask these questions without, I don't know, offending, maybe just, I don't know, some graceful ways that we can ask these questions to get the information that we need in order to relate it in the classroom?
When I was in the classroom directly, I worked for many years in early childhood classrooms. And I used to do a survey at the beginning of the year because I wanted to know more about the families that were coming to me, not just the child that was coming to me. So I was able to ask some questions about the household and how many people were there and who was there, and who was helping raise this child, and that would help me start gathering some information. The other thing that I've used a lot is connection to books, reading stories, and then asking questions throughout the stories to see like if the students are connecting to this. I have seen it all the way to high school. I started my career in high school, and just making those connections and seeing like, does this remind you of something? Do you have somebody in your family like this? Do you have some celebrations like this? You do have some points. If you're engaging in conversations with the parents, if you're having some parent meetings, it's very valuable to actually be very transparent from the beginning and just say, I don't know a lot about, your culture, or I'm trying to learn more about the students in my classroom and the families that are coming to me, and just open up the conversation. I have found that whenever I am being honest and I'm not coming in with assumptions, parents and students are more open to share their culture, their language, their traditions, and we can then establish a better rapport.
Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate you for saying just be transparent. Just say, listen, I want to learn about your community. I want to learn about your culture. I don't currently have a lot of background knowledge and understanding, so please correct me. Please share your insights. Those things are very helpful. So I'm glad you brought that up.
The
Go
other
ahead.
thing that helps, pronunciation, even from Spanish to Spanish, like there are some pronunciation of words that you were mentioning, the R's, the CH, the double L's, and the Y's, like those are pronounced differently. I have had people correct me in pronunciation of a word that is in Spanish just because their dialect pronounces a specific letter differently. And I always appreciate it because I want to be respectful of those words or those names, just like I want people to respect my name as well.
Got you. Okay. So here's the thing, because I see this again. I'm everything that we're talking about is things I've seen, and again, the things I've seen with a teacher's best intentions. We have a student. Let's transition out of Spanish, but let's say it's another cultural festival or holiday, and I'll give you an example: Chinese New Year. Okay, I had a teacher that wanted to support. She had a large population of Chinese students, and so she took on the idea of hosting a Lunar New Year in her classroom. Now, she does not share that cultural background. It didn't go well because she did all these things. Again, best intentions, did all these things and hosted a Chinese New Year event. However, she missed the mark. And so now parents were upset, things like that. The question that I have to you, Grace, is because I know people will say cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation. Where's the line? What are some maybe tips that you can give for teachers that are, look, I want to celebrate your culture and community, but what are some ways maybe they can do it the right way, if that makes sense, so that they aren't necessarily, again, best intentions, but it may limit those opportunities for things not to go well?
The first thing I would have recommended in that case was to actually include members of the community, the celebration, opening up the invitation to have either students or parents like provide information or help in the planning would help us get a long way. The other piece is like going to community organizations in your area that may have additional information that maybe can partner with you to then provide accurate information. So that way it's not, regardless of the intentions, like you want to be able to be respectful and provide accurate information on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head. She didn't ask anybody. She just, went on YouTube and did what she did her own research. And again, best intentions, but then at the same time, it's like you didn't take the time to reach out to anybody that has that background knowledge. And she didn't invite any community members. And her thing was, oh, I don't know anybody. And it's like, okay, but you're wanting to host this event, or you're trying to provide this opportunity or experience for your students, but you didn't do all the work that you needed to do in order to make this happen properly. Because my thing is, like, if you wanted to celebrate, I don't know, 4th of July, she wouldn't have any problem doing all the work to get that done. However, now she's trying to do something that she's not as familiar with, and I felt like she cut some corners. So I'm glad you brought this up.
And parents are excellent partners. If parents know that this is going to benefit students and it is, again, bringing up the assets, they will 100% be on board to support these efforts.
Very good. All right. So we talked about basically asking, not assuming. We talked about there's ways that we can go about it. Again, it does require you to ask and not assume, because even if you're hosting an event, things like that, it could go the wrong direction. Bottom line is, what I'm hearing is asking and not assuming. So let's talk about the assets, because I know a lot of teachers get worried because, oh no, I have a student who does not speak English. I only speak English. I don't know how to still challenge them and provide them with a rigorous curriculum. I don't know, should I translate stuff certain ways? Like, what are some ways that I can still provide an asset-based approach, to my students when there is a language difference? I want to start there.
So there's quite a few strategies that teachers can rely on. You mentioned translation.
Mhm.
Translation is usually the one that a lot of people default to. But if we're helping a student gain another language, we have to know how to balance that out. When to use specific translations or translations of specific words, maybe. When do we give that support and when do we start removing it? We can use visuals, we can use movement. All of these things in the world of second language appreciation, we name them as linguistic scaffolds. And something that people forget is that scaffolding, much like a person that's like redoing their house, a scaffold is supposed to be temporary. It's not supposed to stay there forever. So depending the amount of support that the student need, at the beginning, they might need some translations, some visuals, a lot of help with their vocabulary. But as they're gaining that second language, we have to start removing some of those scaffolds to balance out that they are using their new language. Something that we have more access to now that we didn't, I would say, 7 years ago, is technology to help us with some of those things. Technology that is helping students and adults communicate better because we can chunk the information and not do large passages. We can highlight certain words. We can make connections of language. If it's a Spanish speaking student, there's a lot we can do with cognates, which are words that are written in similarly in English and Spanish, and it means the same. We can use a lot of like the morphological patterns, like your roots and your prefixes and your suffixes, because the languages are born from the same roots, and that can help facilitate that language transition. When we talk about other contents like math, we see a lot of times that our bilingual kids, especially like our Hispanic kids, are very strong in math. What they're missing is the language because they do have the concept of math. So we just have to help them bridge the language. I worked in a district that was a dual language district, and we used to have our vocabulary words color coded. So that way the kids knew the concept. They were just seeing what the vocabulary to call that concept was and be able to help them do the transition. All the Spanish words were written in red, all the English ones were written in blue. So it would help them make those mental maps to make those connections between languages.
All right, very good, very good. Now, here's a question I have because I've gotten different sense of opinions when it comes to placing a student, let's say a multilingual learner, next to a student that is fluent in English and that language that student's primary language is. What are your thoughts on placing a student next to, working together in pairs or placing them in that scenario? What are some maybe your thoughts on that and some things maybe to look out for if that's the situation that's happening?
So peer support, it's really valid. And if used correctly, it can be super helpful for our students. What we have to balance out is the proficiency level. So for example, sometimes we have kids that have a lower proficiency level in English. They need a lot of help. And teachers automatically think, oh, I'm going to put them with this like absolutely fluent student. That can be frustrational for both of them because I am going to have to do, if I'm very fluent, I'm going to have to do a lot of lift and a lot of explanations for the low proficiency student. And for the low proficiency student, you might be so proficient that I'm still not understanding you. So a strategy that we recommend to teachers is to make a list of the proficiency levels of their students from the very low to the very high and kind of like pair them in half. So your lowest will be paired with like a medium one and a medium with a high. So that way we're still stretching the language of the students to help them support each other, but it's not as frustrational as it would be with a very low proficiency and a very high proficiency student. When I visit classrooms, it's really interesting to see that as well, how kids are really great about supporting each other and helping each other in the language. Sometimes you need to let them be and process that information in their main language and then practice how to use their new language. So that way they can perform in the English only setting. Okay. Another place where I have seen great community of kids supporting each other in electives. Sometimes we only think about these supports during core classes, and our kids, especially in secondary, their sports classes, they want to be in their music classes, in their art classes, and that's the space where they need to communicate with their friends because they are doing things that are engaging for them. So it's really neat to see how it's kind of organic how it happens. Like teachers can pair them, but you see the kids because they're more engaged in something that they really care about, and they tend to pair almost immediately because they will ask for help to get more information on what they want to learn.
All right. Good, good, good. This is good. So it sounds like you do support peer support for students if it's done correctly with
Yeah.
fidelity. I also will add to it, this does not take away a teacher's responsibility to
Yep.
ensure that that child is being communicated and getting the support that they need. You not just pass that child off to another of your class, to their classmate, and say, all right, from now on, this is your you buddy up, right? There needs to be some, I guess, still some levels of boundaries, if you will, and it does not take the onus off of the teacher. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And that also doesn't mean that you are sitting that child all day in a computer either,
Mm,
which is also something that we have noticed that it can be frustrational for the teachers if they don't have that additional language and they're like, oh, we have a computer. Maybe the computer can help with this information. The kids still need the teacher to be able to help bridge that learning into more actionable things.
sometimes it seems easy, especially if you only have one or two students, and oh, I got 30 other kids, and so it seems easier to do it that way. But again, I think we're at the end of the day, we're doing our children a disservice if that is our method. So then let's talk about how do I communicate? Because I could hear my audience out here. Okay, so you're telling us that we shouldn't just leave it on to a student or leave it on to a computer. So what can I do? I don't speak the language. I want to support my child, this student. What are some strategies? Like, do you recommend Google Translate? Do you recommend some other tools that we can utilize?
Google Translate has come a long way, I have to say, as a user of and a monitor of Google Language Translate, it's come a long way. There are several pieces of technology that are advancing and have been advancing throughout the years. Looking at your text or whatever you're teaching, and it can be with the help, your curriculum should have this information for you, like key vocabulary that needs to be taught to students. We usually go there. We have to make sure that we have that vocabulary accessible to our students, and that can be through the use of visuals, through the use of movement, so they actually make a connection with the movement, which helps with memory, or word banks and have definitions of the word. I will say that these strategies not only help our multilingual learners, but they help any student. They will help your students that are on special education. They will help your students that are below grade level. So these linguistic supports are really good for all students because it helps them anchor language better. That's another thing. Anchor charts and having those pieces in the classroom are super helpful. It's important for the kids to use the language. So when we're planning for our lesson, we have to have some moments of interaction that are very much planned for the students to talk to each other and actually engage in discourse using that language that we're trying for them to use. Usually we talk about sentence stems and we put partial sentences and they fill it in with vocabulary. But we have to also be strategic about that. Who are we pairing with who? And how are we structuring those sentences for them to use them? And then when we do that, teachers also need to then monitor those conversations and walk around the classroom and check in and make sure that they are making meaning of what they're talking about. Are they staying on topic? And it doesn't mean correcting pronunciation. We are all in our own journey in language. I don't know why people think that you stop learning language. I mean, I'm constantly learning two languages still because language is ever evolving. So this is not about correcting that pronunciation, but really making sure that the kids are understanding what they're talking about, like the meat and potatoes of the lesson. So that way we can course correct whatever misconceptions they're having and making sure that they understand the content.
All right, very good. So this has been very helpful. I want to just give you an opportunity to share if there's any additional strategies that we haven't touched on specifically with multilingual learners, or any other pieces that you want to add to the conversation.
I think the other piece that I wanted to add to the conversation, which is part of the work that I get to do now, for years, we have been trying to support our students in the classroom through professional development and training, or using these strategies that we've been talking about. The one piece that we forget to talk about is the actual curriculum, the actual materials that are being built for students. We still have a long ways to go with those materials. We really need to be asking for materials that are coming with some of these scaffolds that we've been talking about, some of these expectations of the students for their conversations and their interactions, and the monitoring of the teachers, because teachers cannot do it all. They need to differentiate for the kids that are sitting in their classroom, but if we're not giving them something to start with, if we're not giving them some examples in that materials, we are making their work even harder, especially when they have, if it's a high school teacher, they could have 150 kids in one day in their classes, and they're having to adjust throughout the day for their needs. So that's one of the neat things now in working with ELSF, that we're actually working to educate more in curriculum materials and in asking for the same level of rigor. We want high quality materials for our kids, but we're asking for more support in there specifically for our multilingual learners.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the curriculum that because a lot of times, district wide, like as teachers, we're told here's the standards for the state, and then here's the curriculum that you have to utilize. This school district that I'm working for, they just adopted a new math curriculum, so like teachers are transitioning to that. So you're saying still make sure that with the curriculum that you are utilizing, ensure that it is going to support our multilingual learners.
Yes, absolutely. But also let's ask for those things of the curriculum writers, and let's include our multilingual teams when we're adopting materials. You just said you just got materials. It would be interesting to know, like, who was part of that committee. Did we check those materials to make sure that they were supportive of all students? Because that way, when we're bringing all of these pieces into the table to actually like look for materials, like we're ensuring that all kids are going to be represented, and we have a better chance to get better materials in front of students.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I'll say this, Grace. I have thoroughly learned a lot from you in this conversation in regards to multilingual learners. Love for you to take us home with any last final words of advice you want to provide to our listeners.
I'm a big proponent of working in collaboration and working in the collective. There is an African proverb that says that if you want to go fast, you go alone, but if you want to go far, you go together. So find those partners in the work that can help you analyze your materials, build some strategies together. Because at the end of the day, if we're having the students at the center of the work that we're doing, we need to lift all the students together.
Absolutely. Well, Grace, if we have some folks that want to connect with you, what's the best way to reach you online?
So you can find me in LinkedIn under my full name, Altagracia H. Delgado. And I can communicate from there.
All right, there it is. Well, Grace, once again, it has truly been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.